how complicit was the European Union's border agency Frontex in endangering the lives of migrants between Turkey and Greece? Boats packed with men, women and children are said to have been illegally forced back from a Greek island, and there's pressure on the head of Frontex to resign. Hello from me, David Foster. Well, the man in charge of the EU's border agency says there will be a full inquiry, but some members of the European Parliament say the agency has gone rogue. Frontex is under fire for letting Greece illegally push back migrants to Turkey. Forcibly keeping migrants away from where they're trying to go are known as pushbacks and go against international refugee protection agreements, which state that people should not be expelled or returned when their lives might be at risk. Internal reports disclosed by the German newspaper Der Spiegel found that Frontex's director, Fabrice Leggeri, knew that refugees were forced out of European Union waters. The paper said Leggeri was aware of at least one violation and accused him of trying to cover up for Frontex in a recent European Parliament committee meeting. Leggeri denied any claims of pushbacks by the border agency.
We have not found evidence that there were active, direct or indirect participation of Frontex staff or officers deployed by Frontex.
Many MEPs are calling for his resignation and argue that Frontex is complicit in illegal pushbacks.
Well, Greece is not the only country where Frontex is being accused of complicity with pushbacks. We hear these reports from Croatia and Hungary as well. So a drastic reform is urgently needed.
Can the European Union trust Frontex to control its borders, or does it need major reforms? Well, I'm very pleased to say that we can head to Athens, first of all, to welcome Yonous Muhammadi, co-founder of Greek Forum of Refugees. In Amsterdam, we see Jorrit Rijpma, Professor of European Union Law at Leiden University, and then to Cardiff, where we see Christian Kaunert, Professor of Policing and Security at the University of South Wales. Good to have each and every one of you with us. I'm going to say at the start that we're going to read out a statement from Frontex in a little while, but Yonous, let me come to you first of all. Out at sea, what is going on?
Actually, we are speaking about pushbacks that it is not something new, that it is for a long time and in recent years that it is happening. But the new is that now that it is very obviously that we see that even Frontex, not just they are observing, but they are also somehow they are involved even in this illegal action. It is not just I say, and now it is very clear to me that I'm representing actually the grassroots. We were calling for so long times and years for that, but now organizations, very official organizations, and also MPs and some officials, even from the European Parliament and inside the Frontex, that now they are speaking about this, which is really serious, and I'm happy that now somehow it is being taken seriously.
Okay, but what are Frontex actually doing? If other people are pushing back the migrants, what are Frontex doing? Just standing by, or are they actively or doing the same thing?
Actually, what is being done now, it is obviously not just people that they are trying to enter Europe that being pushed back, but also people that they have been in Greece for a long time and they have this asylum application. The police even they take them and also return them back to Turkey. That we have now, we are making trials. We have evidence of people that they have been pushed back 2, 3 times, even 4 times pushed back there. But we know that through all these borders now, some thousands of Frontex forces are there, and they are observing this. And we know that they are protecting, of course, the European borders, but also they are protecting European laws and conventions and international laws, which is pushing back means violating at a very basic human rights, European Convention and also International Refugee Convention, which is Geneva 1951.
Quite possibly endangering lives in the process. Jorrit, let me come to you.
Yes,
is what Frontex is said to be doing illegal?
Well, what is illegal is to push people back at the border. That is illegal in terms of international law, refugee law, but also European Union law. And I think Frontex is a bit of an odd character. I think it would be good to briefly say what it does. It's an EU agency, but it doesn't have, at least for now, not yet its own border guards. So what it is doing is that it coordinates the cooperation between Greek border guards who are being, so to say, helped out by colleagues from other member states. So this is where you, for instance, have seen recent footage where there's actually a Romanian boat blocking the way of a migrant boat coming from Turkey. And what is new and what we see now increasingly reports that not just the Greek border guard authorities are indeed engaged in pushbacks, but that actually Frontex, which all it really does, and this is also its argument, it says we don't really do this, this is the responsibility of Greece. But what is increasingly becoming clear is that within the agency and also amongst the participating border guards from other member states, there is now knowledge that the Greeks are involved in pushback operations.
I'd like to go into that in a little bit more detail a little bit later on, but I just want to establish exactly what's happening out on the waters. So, Jorrit, should Frontex, in this situation where it sees, say, Greek border guards coming out and trying to push back the migrant boats, should it be intervening to stop this?
Well, the interesting thing is that Frontex doesn't have the power of command and control over the Greek border guards. But what it can do is say, we will not participate in any of this. So Frontex coordinates this, what is called joint operations between member states' border guards at the Greek border. And it has an obligation. There, the executive director should say, my organization will not coordinate, support, fund, help in any way in pushbacks, and it has an obligation.
Yeah, but that's almost impossible to do when you've got an incident going on at sea. You can't get on the phone to Mr. Ligeri and say, look, we need this, you've got to tell us what to do. I mean, they have to decide there and then.
Well, it should be very clear from the outset that there shall be no pushbacks in whatever operation is coordinated.
So
by
should
Frontex.
they try and stop it?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. But this is the interesting thing is that Frontex itself always says we are complying with all European and international human rights, and yet they allow these operations to take place in which there are pushbacks taking place.
All right, so let's bring in Christian, if I may, at this point. I think you believe that this is happening more and more frequently. It's been going on for some time, but there are more instances of it nowadays.
Yeah, I think what we've seen is that, of course, Frontex has been turned into the European Border and Coast Guard. And with that kind of change that has come with it, it does come with more and greater operational involvement. Like Jorrit pointed out, I think from the legal point of view, the standpoint is very, very clear. But of course, from the political, in a sense, conditions that have been changing, there's also something that is happening that since 2015, it's been very clear that on the European political scene, especially in a number of key countries such as Germany, it's very clear that they didn't want those events of 2015 to repeat themselves, and they're going to be willing to make sure that they don't repeat themselves, which then puts a certain political pressure on member states and of course on Frontex, that is primarily governed by the wishes of member states, to be in compliance with that. And as a result of that, there's a more political pressure to be involved in some of those pushbacks, even though, like
I would like to bring up the issue of EU complicity in these double standards, if you like, in just a moment. But I want to read out the Frontex statement, or at least part of it. Frontex aims to uphold the highest standards of border control within our operations. We are fully committed to respecting fundamental rights, and indeed we have an independent fundamental rights officer whose task is to oversee the respect of fundamental rights in all our operations. Is that happening, Christian?
Well, I mean, legally, they're absolutely correct to point out that this exists, the legal functions are there, and in fact, they have a cooperation agreement also with the Fundamental Rights Agency. So there is a very clear emphasis on that legally, but politically, the question is, like Jorrit was pointing out, if member states such as Greece or other member states that might be involved decide to push back, they don't have that control function to actually physically stop them from doing this. All they can do is to step back and say, we're not taking part in this. But they don't have an enforcement mechanism as such to stop member states from doing that, except, later people can go to court over those issues.
An appropriate time to go to Yonous to ask you about, I think you've got 5 legal cases pending. Tell us about those.
We have many cases, and also actually because we are the refugee communities, so we have the complaints from those who have been pushed back in Turkey, and also those who have tried so many times and already back after 4 or 5 or.
But what are you trying to do with these legal cases? What are you trying to do?
We have these 5 cases that they have been in Greece. They have applied for asylum, but they have been arrested because they were trying to pass the Greek border to Italy, for example, in one port. So the police, they arrested them and directly pushed them back and deported them back to Turkey, which is they are Afghans from Afghanistan, but they pushed them back and deported them to Turkey. So
and if you win your case, sorry to try and hurry you up a little bit, but if you win your case, what will their status be? Where will they end up?
Actually, I'm not a lawyer. I don't know exactly what happened, but what we try to do that it is actually an illegal, absolutely an illegal action that has been done by Greek authorities, and it has been supported. At least it didn't stop. It has not been stopped by Frontex or European borders, that they are observing the borders. That is the case.
So let's bring Jorrit back in at this particular point. If it's very difficult for Frontex to intervene, what does it need to do? Is it at fault here, or is it the European Union states themselves? Greece, in this case, being suggested as being complicit in it. Is it their fault, really, rather than Frontex's?
Well, that's the difficulty when you work so intensively together at different levels of government. And that's exactly what the problem here is. Of course, Greece is responsible, and it's also responsible if it directs other member states' assets, other member states' boats to do illegal activity. The big question is, where does that leave Frontex and, in fact, the European Union's responsibility? And I would say there's direct responsibility for the member states involved, but there is definitely an indirect responsibility, given the fact that Frontex had the possibility of withdrawing its funds, of stopping operations. It could not command Greek border guards not to do something, but in having knowledge of this and basically turning a blind eye, you could argue that it is complicit, at least, in this illegal activity.
But it's being encouraged, you suggest, by EU member states. Surely the blame lies there, rather than people who have an operational responsibility, but not a political one.
Well, of course, there's the legal and the political. Legally, it's how I explained that the primary responsibility is with the member states, and the agency may be held accountable for complicity. But I think what is very interesting, and I think my colleague also very well explained that, is that we're obviously in a difficult political situation. What we see here is the incapacity of Europe to come to some form of responsibility sharing, and that you see a distinct different attitude now also amongst the Greek government, which says we have done our share and we don't want to get any more people onto the islands. And I think so I think politically what this shows, it's the failure of Europe to come together and to actually come to some form of responsibility sharing. What we see here is the symptom of a failing European asylum policy.
We will go into that in just a moment when we come to discuss solutions to it. But I want to hear from Tanja Fajon, or Fajon, I apologize if I've got the name wrong, Slovenian member of the European Parliament.
Let me just stress once again that we are not just shocked by the reports, but we are also saddened by them. And those incidents, firing, shots at people, destroying boat engines, putting people back in boats and towing them away. In fact, we are speaking about pushbacks.
Christina, it's catch-22, isn't it?
Indeed. I mean, it's a very, very difficult situation, and the political situation is not going to get any better. The elections that we've had over the last couple of years, they've been increasingly strengthening some of the far-right elements in different European countries. That puts also political pressure on member states to ensure that those 2015 events do not happen again. I think, especially in Germany, that situation is very, very clear, where Angela Merkel was really, in a sense, vilified for her opening of borders in 2015. And the political scene has become very, very tough for a number of European politicians. I believe in a number of European countries, like in France, for instance, with the presidential elections, and Marine Le Pen outside the door is putting political pressure on President Emmanuel Macron as well. And we have that situation in a number of European countries. And as a result of that, there is political pressure to ensure that the borders are, in a sense, closed to an extent.
Sorry, could this backfire on members of the European Parliament, on the European Union as a whole, if it is pointing the finger at Frontex, when in fact its member nations are in fact complicit in this, and that will eventually get all the headlines rather than the border patrols itself?
Well, member states for some time now have actually benefited from the scapegoating effect of Frontex to an extent, because in a sense, it's nice to kind of push the blame a little bit towards this neutral agency that can kind of say, well, we're adhering to the standards as much as we want, but member states don't fully have to take responsibility, political responsibility, even though legally speaking, member states are all part of the board of Frontex. So they are, in fact, directing Frontex in all of its operations. So member states have that political responsibility, but it's a convenient way to misdirect political responsibility towards the agency. So in that sense, it's been a convenient creation for member states.
Let's talk about how this can be sorted out. Yonous, let me come to you. This is an agency, Frontex, with a budget of round about €500 million. What do you think needs to be done to change this?
I think when we speak about European borders, when we speak about this European borders, when we speak about some thousands of soldiers and this budget that you said, that actually it shows that they are going to fight someone, that maybe the borders of Europe are threatened by some groups, but actually there is not any threats. The threats here that as Frontex or as shows to us, it is asylum seekers and refugees, that it cannot be dealt with Frontex and with these budgets and with armies. And this putting armies and weapons at the border, I think it is not the way.
Are you saying it's not so much Frontex that is at fault here? It is a migration policy that's been adopted by the European Union.
Of course, it is something that the biggest problem here is that there is not actually a common migration policy and a common asylum policy in Europe. That actually there is a problem in Greece and at the Greek border, of course, because actually there is these countries at the border that they are taking all this problems, I can say, in this.
Okay.
And if I see actually this budget that we see for Frontex, if there is a European will and global will, we should see to the cause of this migration and this refugee issue. And you cannot stop those people that are forced to their countries and they have to leave their countries. It is their last choice to leave their countries and come to Europe.
No, I do understand that. And
Frontex.
with due respect, we've been into those issues many, many times and we'll do so again. We're talking about practicalities here. So, Jorrit, is it time to scrap Frontex, to sack Mr. Leggeri, or would that achieve nothing?
I think there's two things that need to be done. In the short term, full respect for fundamental rights, meaning that pushbacks need to stop. And Frontex need to withdraw all involvement, make sure that they're not in any way involved. And I think they also need to very much look at their own organization. I think the hearing...
Can I stop you there for a second? If
sorry,
Frontex withdraws from those pushbacks, it doesn't mean they're not going to happen, though, does it?
No, exactly. So what I'm saying is the second point that should happen is that the Commission then holds Greece accountable for full respect of the European asylum laws. That's the second thing that needs to happen. But those are things that need to happen in the short run to ensure full respect of fundamental rights at Europe's borders. But secondly, and I think that's something that was already pointed out, we need to think long term. And that means that we cannot consider Greece. Greece is not guarding just the Greek border, it's guarding the border of the Schengen area, it's guarding a European border, and that requires European solidarity and a European approach to the refugee problem. That has been long said, but it is time that we really start working on that now. Having said that, that does not take away from the fact that I think Frontex at this point, and I understand why this was a particular MEP from the S&D faction, but why they are calling for his resignation, because the hearing showed no sort of understanding of the illegality of the actions the agency has been sort of drawn into, and I think that's very problematic.
Okay, Christian, is this, you alluded to Romania being involved in this earlier on, but I'm going to go away from that particular country and ask you, is this happening elsewhere? Are we simply talking about the northern European borders, or are we talking about around Italy, around the coast of Spain, and France as well? Are we seeing it right the way across the Mediterranean Sea and other areas of water there?
I think in principle that can happen at any point with the southern European borders where there's a particularly acute issue in terms of big migration streams. And if we look at the last 15 years, basically, we've seen a variety of different crises, and the European Union, to an extent, supports that particular member state, starting from the 2000s in Spain and the kind of border towards Morocco, then moving towards Italy and Libya, and then later Greece and Turkey. So we've seen that kind of shifting. Every time one border gets reinforced, and a migration stream kind of shifts, and that border gets reinforced, and the migration stream shifts, and that border gets reinforced, and then we start all over again.
It's a bit like a balloon, you're suggesting. The moment you squeeze it in one place, the air just goes somewhere else. The problem in this case.
It is helping in those particular moments, but what happens is that, of course, the systemic issue doesn't go away. The kind of fact that there are migration flows, the fact that there are people in need of protection, that doesn't go away because you're reinforcing the borders.
I asked Jorrit what he thought needs to change. Quickly from you, Christian, if you would, what do you think needs to change at the moment, immediately, if you like?
I think immediately, of course, there's pressure on the director to resign. I don't know whether that would really change matters, but of course, as a larger issue, what would happen is that the European Parliament puts a spotlight on these issues, and I think they're hoping that member states, as a result of having a spotlight on them, are going to withdraw from some of those pushbacks a little bit. So I think that's what they're hoping to achieve immediately. I think longer term, I think the only issue that can help is to rethink the Dublin system and to really look at the full implementation of human rights right across the European Union, which legally is actually in existence. It's just not in practice always followed.
Yonous, I know you can only really comment on what's happening on the Greek-Turkey border or thereabouts, but many more migrants make it across than get pushed back, surely.
Yes, of course. In last 2 weeks, we have 2 cases of pushbacks, one with 40 people and one with 23 people, just in the last 2 weeks. We had this pushbacks from agency. When we speak about agency, that it cannot be done without the observation of Frontex. It means that Frontexers are looking and they can see what is happening in this area, and it is happening. It is something that almost every day we are getting complaints from groups of asylum seekers, refugees, and also many organizations that they are involved in Greek islands.
Yonous, Jorrit, Christian, thank you very much indeed for being on this roundtable. We thank you wherever you happen to have picked up our program. Do so again if you can. We also have a YouTube channel. That's Roundtable at TRT World on YouTube. From me, David Foster, from the Roundtable team, goodbye for now.